Good evening, friends. My name is Inaara. My pronouns are she, hers, and I serve the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting as the Inclusion and Belonging Coordinator, and I am a regular attender of Chestnut Hill Friends meeting, and I am overjoyed that many friends from our meeting are here with me today. I feel very supported. As the Inclusion and Belonging Coordinator, I serve you. I serve the yearly meeting. It is a role of service and community. And the question I think about often is, what are the needs of our communities and how do we uplift those concerns and transform them into places of welcoming love and belonging? And today I'm going to cue up the PowerPoint. I hope to speak with you more about forgiveness and resilience. Is everyone able to see the PowerPoint? Okay, I'm getting some nods. Wonderful. So thank you firstly to Lois, who reached out to me many months ago, last year. This has been on the calendar for quite some time. To Susanna for meeting with me. We met at Chestnut Hill Friends meeting for the quarterly gathering last year, and to Alec, who is a friend of Arch Street Friends, for helping to answer all my logistical questions and get this set up for us today. And so I begin. I want to begin with the idea of a robust citational practice. Now, this is an idea that I have gotten from Kimberly Nicole Foster, who is the founder of the digital space, the YouTube channel for Harriet. And I was wondering if it is okay, so I'm not talking extensively, if a friend would volunteer to read this quote. Would anyone be so kind? There's many things to read, so if you don't read now, I'm gonna get you later. And I'm not able to see everyone. So did someone raise their hand? Sarah, thank you, Sarah. Would you be able to read this quote, please?
Sure, thanks. Robust citational practice, Kimberly Nicole Foster. A robust citational practice is a really important part of my feminism. One of the reasons why I have a robust citational practice is to underscore the fact that we didn't just get here, that Black women built this house of Black women. The house that we are currently standing in is not just a house that we just walked in. It is a house that we constructed brick by brick. That is our labor. That is our work. That is our activism. That is our theory.
Thank you, Sarah. The reason I wanted to include this is both because in talking about inclusion and belonging, I want to emphasize to friends that this is not a rather new idea, but ideas that have been concerns, queries, and efforts among friends for centuries, truly. And that when I introduce an idea, it's often from other people that I have the great joy of sharing. And when we do that, we are in essence, as we dialogue, building community and acknowledging each other this way. Another reason I begin with this concept of a citational practice is because of this role of inclusion and belonging coordinator. It is not lost on me that many institutions across the country and across the world were thinking more about the efforts to be addressing exclusive practices. How do we address racism? How do we address misogyny? How do we address classism? How do we address the biases we have against disabled people? And one of the key moments that I consider in these types of roles being structured into institutions was in 2020 with the police murder of George Floyd and the social change that was sparked, the protests and the conversations that came from that murder and from the protests that followed that murder. And so I think it is important as someone who is not Black to acknowledge that the work I do is grounded deeply in the work of Black activists and educators and community members at the local and national level. So I present this idea as a way to hopefully ground us as we move forward. So I want to talk about the idea of forgiveness and resilience, and that desire stems from the testimony of peace that friends have. And I am not sure how each of you feel about it, but for me, the testimony of peace right now in my journey of faith is one of the most difficult testimonies to understand and uphold and abide by. It causes a lot of discomfort, and where I would wish for integrity, I waver a lot. And yet it is something that often I'm very proud of when community members ask me what it is I do, or if a friend, a lowercase f friend, doesn't know much about Quakerism and our faith, one of the first things I mention about Quakerism and friends is the idea of the peace testimony. It's what is a grounding pillar for the work that I see so many friends doing at the meeting level and in the wider communities. And one of the quotes that grounds us is that of the Declaration of Friends to Charles II. This was in 1660. If I may have another friend volunteer to read this. All right. Maeve, I saw you unmuted.
You caught me. I'll read it.
Thank you, Maeve.
We utterly deny with all outward wars and strife and fightings with outward weapons, for any end or under any pretense whatsoever. This is our testimony to the whole world, that the Spirit of Christ, by which we are guided, is not changeable, so as once to command us from a thing as evil, and again to move unto it. And we do certainly know, and so testify to the world, that the Spirit of Christ, which leads us into all truth, will never move us to fight and war against any man with outward weapons, neither for the kingdom of Christ, nor for the kingdoms of this world.
Thank you, Maeve. One of the things that struck me in that quote was the idea of war. And I think many early friends have thought about war often. And when I think about the peace testimony, I often think of the testimony of peace as it relates to the political climate surrounding wars and conflict and strife in the world. And what I wanted to propose was an idea of conflict and war being two interconnected yet slightly distinct ideas. And I was really moved. I was going through older recordings of Arch Street Friends Adult Education Series videos, and I happened on Joan Broadfield's video on Quaker sense of meeting. And this is what she shared in conversation during her adult education class. War happens when someone wants something that someone else has, or someone is protecting something that someone else wants, or when someone just wants to be in charge of everything. That's what war is. Conflict is a difference of opinion that can be pretty strong. And this is the critical question. How can we make sure that our meetings are not acting in a warlike fashion, rather than conflict that we could talk about? This question is intriguing to me because it opens up the idea that peace is not only something that we can advocate for externally within our countries in times of war that is breaking out abroad. War and warlike attitude is something that we have the potential to carry in our day-to-day life. And how can we become aware when the ways in which we build community or in relationship with each other are more aligned with the values of war rather than the ideas of conflict? How can we think of conflict not as something taboo, but as something we can readily approach, and that doesn't signal fractured community, but an opportunity to deepen our relationship with one another? I will also say that one of Joan's quotes during that class was that conflict is a gift from God through which we can work together to figure out something difficult. That's a paraphrase, but I want to emphasize that conflict is a very positive sign of community. For conflict to occur, we often need to have trust, vulnerability, belonging, and dialogue. I have to be able to feel comfortable enough to signal to friends, this is what I truly believe, and I'm taking the risk, both in exposing the reality of what I am experiencing, but also in risking that you will be able to hold my humanity, that I can trust you in caretaking of this concern I have. And it comes from a deep point of affection and love for a community. Oftentimes, we have concerns for people and things and places we care about deeply. We feel a sense of connection to. And the reverse is often true. People, places, and things we feel very remote and distant from, either emotionally or geographically. We have to work much harder for there to be a sense of belonging within that sphere. So conflict is inevitable. Conflict is a core part of community. And it is an opportunity for us to deepen and better understand each other. And conflict, while this wondrous thing, often gets a really negative framing of being only something that is full of misunderstanding, miscommunication, or disagreement that can lead to pain and harm. And my request, and something I'm trying to practice, is trying to hold both of these truths together. That conflict is a sign of love. Conflict is a sign of commitment to a community. And that conflict can be a sign of pain and harm doing too. And that the task at hand is being able to carry this conflict as a natural and organic result of being in beloved community with one another. I wonder if anyone, and it's okay if not, but the query I have that I wonder if anyone would like to share is, what are some of the conflicts in my meeting? And this can be as general as you'd like, or perhaps it can be a conflict that you've witnessed in another meeting or something that you find you yourself constantly come back to.
First, I'd like to mention Sarah's had her hand up for a while.
Sarah, I apologize. Would you like to share something?
I think that was probably from when she volunteered to read earlier.
Thank you, May.
I can talk about a conflict that is long running at Arch Street. There's a source of money that was given to the meeting around 1906, I think, called the John Martin Trust. And it comes with a document stating that the money is to help impecunious friends. This money has been repeatedly given to Friends Select School, which is neither impecunious nor a friend. About 5% of the students there are friends. And the meeting has consulted 2 lawyers. Is it okay to give John Martin Trust money to Friends Select? And both lawyers said no, but they continue to do it. So this is an ongoing conflict.
Yeah.
Can you describe what elements about the situation signal to you that it is a conflict?
People leave the meeting over it. People get into huge arguments at the annual meeting or the monthly meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's a source of great, perhaps,
Yeah.
disconnect. The stakes are rather high.
Yes, so we're talking about a fund that has over $8 million in it.
Lois, let me ask you this. Has there been anything over time that you have found expressed by friends who disagree that's been a point of unity?
No.
I finally got the meeting to agree to have threshing sessions, ongoing threshing sessions until we could agree on something. They had one meeting and never again, even though I repeatedly asked and they had agreed, but they wouldn't even agree they wouldn't even do that. The more powerful people in the meeting want to give the John Martin money to Friends Select. So he's doing it.
Yeah. So what I sense you saying is that perhaps there are relationships of hierarchy that
yes, that's
voices
real.
of friends.
Definitely. Yeah.
That the feeling might be that not every friend's concerns is given equal weight.
Right.
True.
That there is a hope for ongoing collaboration, ongoing dialogue that is not right now ongoing. It felt momentary in that particular.
It just happened once and then they never did it again.
Can you share?
The money hasn't been given out, though. That's the issue. And Lois was told to stand aside. She disagreed. It was a strange situation.
Lois, you did stand aside?
I was ordered to stand aside. The clerk of the meeting told me I had to, and I went and looked it up afterwards. I'd never heard of such a thing. And no, the clerk does not have that power, but I didn't know at the time. So I sat down and shut up.
I can sense a lot of pain that you must have felt from this.
Yeah, but I hung in there, and it never got resolved while I was a member.
Does this conflict still give you pain now?
Not really, because I'm not a member anymore.
I recognize a lot of constancy that you brought to this conversation and your persistence. And I imagine that was done out of a lot of love for your meeting, if that is fair to say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for your love. I know that can be a rather sometimes fluffy thing, but I think love is a commitment. Love is action. Love is presence. Love is difficult, and you persisted. I want to name that is the way in which you embodied your concern. The conflict was sourced in love. Thank you for sharing that, Lois.
Well, thank you.
With that, I would like to take this conflict that you've shared as a way to remind us of the weight, challenges of being in community as we go through the rest of this hour together. What are we doing if we're not caring for each other? It's something that I find a vibrant thread among many friends' communities. So thank you for caring for your community, Lois, for our community. I want to thank you, Lois, because you've introduced this wonderful idea of an ongoing nature. I have often used the phrase conflict resolution, but I was introduced to this idea of conflict transformation. This is a quotation from Professor Boats, who was a professor at the University of Baltimore, from an essay of his. And may I have another friend read this quotation? Ray, you looked up with what seems like a smile. Are you okay to read this quotation? Oh no, you're muted, Ray. There we go.
Conflict transformation refers to the process of moving from conflict habituated systems to peace systems, transforming deep-rooted conflicts is only partly about resolving the issues of the conflict. The central issue is systemic change or transformation. Implied in this definition is the notion that conflict transformation is a continuous process.
Thank you, Ray. The concept that is the catalyst for conflict transformation and distinguishing that from conflict resolution is that conflict resolution has this implication that a conflict can simply come to an end. Person A wants something, person B wants something, solution C is come up with. The matter is closed and you move on. And what can be helpful, especially in building community as friends do, I often have shared that there is a reason why friends are so pulled to the way we worship and the way that we have structured our monthly meetings or quarterly meetings and our yearly meetings. It is a very collaborative and collective way of structuring a community. And it is extremely, extremely challenging to provide the constant care and support and presence, especially when each of us lives in a society when our time and resources are constantly being demanded elsewhere. And time is a resource that many of us don't get to spend in the ways that we would like to. Conflict transformation is a way of thinking about relationships and community as one where every time there is a conflict, it is an opportunity to learn more about the wholeness and humanity of the other. I often think that as we get to know people in our lives, and I wonder if this might resonate with friends tonight, I am learning the specific language by which friends operate. So I know when my mom does a particular thing, it means she's upset. I know that when my partner says something in a particular way, she's really grateful. I know that when my colleague sighs at a particular time of the day, it means they're really frustrated and they might need some help. And I've only gotten to learn these things because I have been in relationship with these particular people in my life. And we are each learning the very unique ways that our minds work, especially given the larger conversations we've been having around disability and neurodivergency, and that our minds are structured in such particular unique ways. And also given our different personal and cultural and historical backgrounds that inform who we are. Every time we're in conflict, I wonder if I can plant a seed of curiosity. If when we perhaps in our minds go to a moment of defensiveness, we can posit, I wonder why this person does not feel safe. I wonder why or what has happened that has allowed this friend to feel uncomfortable or excluded. I think that sense of curiosity can often help us relieve this protectionism that comes up in us. We, as people, we all want to be very good. And as Quakers, we embrace this legacy we have of being good people. And also, if we relax a little bit on this rigidity we have about being good, if I can receive someone's words that I've hurt them and know that I'm still fully human, worthy of love, and I love because I am loved and I can give love, then perhaps I can engage in a more spiritually affirming way with the friend that has been harmed or pained. And I am a very impatient person. So there was a part of me that was annoyed when I learned that conflict transformation is a continuous, ongoing process. And many theorists, especially those who work at the level of international politics and peace diplomacy, have written about and theorized that conflict transformation is a never-ending process. It is a way of understanding human society that requires constant remixing, recollaborating, and adjusting. So it's constantly tweaking as we move forward, as time changes, as different people enter and exit community. I wanted to ask you, are there any ideas or thoughts or responses that come up to the question, how can my meeting embody conflict transformation? Steve and Mio.
As you've been speaking, Inaara, what's been going through my mind, just because it's a fresh cycle of memories, is a meeting's nomination process, where it has this challenge to fill up these various positions with the right people in the right place to do the work of the meeting with, again, as you've eloquently said, against the pressure of all the other demands on our times and lives and schedules and so on. And there are times when it really works. What I haven't heard you say so far that in my own life I've found is often the key is to give way to the leadings of the Spirit. That when it looks like there's going to be a conflict, and we've had several in the nominating process in our meeting where people have been eldered to do something and refuse to do it, and we live with that and we forgive them, but we'd really prefer something else to happen. But you never know when a miracle is going to happen. And sometimes if the ground is prepared rightly, or even if it's not, things break loose and problems are resolved not through any human agency, but because of something else that happened. Often, as I look at it in retrospect, a spiritual miracle. And I think that I was thinking of our system of doing business as Quakers and our court system. You could say that the court system in America is designed to be a conflict transformational mechanism, but doesn't do a very good job of it right now. A lot of people are suffering because the court makes tough decisions. But the ideal of a good court system is to bring about justice because penalties are meted out according to the crime, and maybe people are even rehabbed. I don't know. That doesn't seem to be happening. But there are these different systems that try to deal with that are set up to deal with conflict all the time. But what I find lovely that keeps me among friends is that we're open to the movement of the Spirit, which often does that work if we let it.
You, Steve. Steve, you got to unmute. I have some follow-ups.
Okay, I don't have to be.
I wanted to ask Steve, is there something that you observed, or perhaps if you'd like to share an instance of a moment when you witnessed friends opening up to the leadings of Spirit that really helped address or transform conflict? Something that comes to mind?
Well, the classic conflict in our meeting occurred about 12 or 14 years ago. It was before I was in the meeting, so I'm only reading about this in chronicles from the past. And that is when the meeting was in the process of considering building a new meeting house. And there were some people who were staunchly opposed to it. And the way it was engineered, they kind of went on 2 or 3 tracks at once. And some people saying, okay, well, we're going to set up a thing to maintain the old meeting house, but we're also going to lay the foundation for maybe finding an architect for a new meeting house. And we bought this land, but we're not sure if we really want to develop it, blah, blah. So they kind of were working in several directions at once. And it finally came to a head that they had a preceptive clerk. And this is where I think the leading of the Spirit was this person, after many months of this weird dynamic, saying, okay, we need to fish or cut bait. We have to make a decision. Are we going ahead with this new meeting house or not? and they had a called meeting for business in the January, I think it was 2008. 75 people showed up, which is unheard of for a business meeting. And they laid out the whole case for whether to go forward or not. And everybody but 6 people said, yes, let's go forward. And those 6 people stood aside. They weren't told to stand aside, but they knew enough about how this works. They didn't want to be in the way, but they didn't want to block the momentum of these other 69 people, but they wanted to go on record and have their names recorded as not being behind the decision. And that led to about a year of aftermath where those people really didn't stand aside completely. Some of them left the meeting. Some of them kept on arguing and complaining and saying, you're not doing this right, blah, blah, blah. In the end, a lot of forgiveness happened. And a few of those people are still around in the meeting. Most are not. They've gone on, or they've come back to visit years later and they've seen what asset the new meeting house is and how it functions. They don't say they were wrong, but they see the value of why the decision was made the way it was. How many of those interactions have spirit behind them? And how many are just happening because of logic? I can't tell you that. But that's the classic piece in our meeting's history in recent years where there was a conflict that led to people standing aside. And the momentum went ahead anyway. And the result is there for all of you to see.
Thank you, Steve. I'm noticing in this that you've shared, it was a conflict that spanned a great deal of time. It was a conflict that involved an ecosystem of relationships. It was not just the 6 friends in that final business meeting that were affected. It was the entire meeting, and that the meeting itself was affected by the decisions of those both who supported the meeting, building a new meeting house, and those who opposed it. And that the consequences were immense. And it has taken perhaps years after that for healing and peace and forgiveness to take hold.
True, all true.
The relationship with time is quite fascinating to me when we talk about conflict, not just among friends, but among societies in general.
Mio has something to add here.
Oh, yes.
George's hand is up. Great.
Yeah, so I'll wait.
Friend George?
Yes, thank you. I really like this term conflict transformation. For me, it kind of brings to mind more of a question. Is it possible for a meeting to deal with conflict, any kind of conflict, until each person has kind of looked to themselves and the transformations that they have experienced in their life and conflicts internally that they've had, and can recognize perhaps how they resolve those conflicts internally before you can really address system conflicts? It's just a question that kind of was triggered by this notion of conflict as a transformation.
With that question,
I don't know if I made myself clear, but
you did. Mio, I want to pop back to you if you wanted to add anything.
So I think the most direct way any of us learn about conflict is within our own families. And the meeting is a family of sorts, but they're not blood relatives. They're not dependent on each other all the time. But within our own families, maybe that's an think about, to go and probably each of us has had experiences with either immediate family or, you know, the wider network of family, of some miraculous changes, but also some long-standing, stubborn and difficult and heart-wrenching situations. So anyway, that was a passing thought.
A thought that is intimately connected with the question that George brought up of the role of being in community and conflict transformation, and that the community is comprised of individual people, and that sometimes what I find I get personally the most bitter about is that conflict transformation mandates that I change too. And it's difficult to change when I think I'm right and I think everyone else is wrong. And that requires a lot of internal work, like George proposed. And you're right, Mio, that there is the opportunity with being in family, in our most personal, close, intimate relationships, to model, begin practicing what does conflict transformation look like. And taking that practice and extrapolating it out into our wider circles, including our local meetings. I think that's a really powerful idea. Thank you for sharing that not so passing thought. Friends, I wanted to propose, I did not study math and science, but I am trying to think of ways in systematic formats, because I know that there are many among us who are a lot more analytical than myself. So here is a very humanist equation that I offer to you, which is embracing conflict plus practicing forgiveness yields a resilient, beloved community. And again, I want to emphasize that I had taken conflict to be something that is, in very general terms, bad and should be avoided. And I have ended friendships. I have left communities when there was even a whiff of conflict. Because to me, I took that as evidence of malice. I took that as evidence of distrust. And I took that as a clear signal, a clear omen, I need to get out. And what I lost in the process were those relationships, was loving community. And through my work with friends and through being a part of a local meeting, I have learned that conflict is part of the structure, bless you, Susanna, of being in a community. And that it's not about when we ignore conflicts, unfortunately, they don't go away. That would be the best magic trick we could all learn. But when we ignore conflicts, the conflicts tend to gain power and overrun the community and can be very poisonous. So if conflict has that authority, then I think the call is, how do we move forward and embrace conflict and use that with a question of curiosity with each other. I want to share this as well. I believe in a love ethic, and that is an idea that I've learned a lot about from Bell Hooks' work. She is a Black feminist and has written a great number of works, theoretical works. And this one is from All About Love. And I had the chance to participate in Newtown Meeting's adult religious education class in October of last year. And we were talking about strengthening caring community. And I shared among the many tools and skills that Bell Hooks writes about in building a loving communion within our larger community, this slide, and it was a moment of struggle, because I don't think I had at that point really given much thought to forgiveness as a practice grounded in community building. And the quote, which I shall read, is, Within a loving community, we sustain ties by being compassionate and forgiving. Forgiveness is an act of generosity. It requires that we place releasing someone else from the prison of their guilt or anguish over our feelings of outrage or anger. By forgiving, we clear a path on the way to love. True forgiveness requires that we understand the negative actions of another. I want to pause and ask for thoughts or responses that have come up for friends. Does this bring up anything for you?
This is part of the Lord's Prayer. Forgive us our debts as we forgive those, as we forgive our debtors. It's the same, very concise. The Lord's Prayer, of course, is in the Bible, and it's very much part of Protestant church services. In fact, I don't think I've ever been to a Protestant church service where it isn't said. It's very hard to do, though. Forgiving is the hardest thing. I mean, yes. You can just say, well, I forgive you, but I don't want anything more to do with you, which, of course, is the easy thing to do. It's like, yeah, well, I won't ever see that person again. I just cut them out, but I forgive them.
Do you think that is true forgiveness if one says that? No.
It's really not. Yeah.
Sarah?
I was thinking a little go to the meeting that Steve referenced, and I feel like looking back on that whole time, I definitely, and I think the meeting too, learned some things that were helpful with sort of conflict resolution, and a couple stand out to me. One was that there were friends who, the best description I can say is a mediator, that they really, it was unclear what their position was on the build a new meeting, but really listened both individually, brought friends together who had different of opinion, and that sense of being heard both by somebody important in the meeting, as well as he helped when there were two differences of opinion coming together. It really helped both sides be heard. So I think that really helped with conflict resolution. And I think that falling back really, really strongly, led by weighty friends, falling back, what does it mean to stand up? Can you stand aside if you're just pissed off and have given up? No. Really, what is the practice you go through to decide if you are led to really, continue to say no? Is, being able to stand aside. That's really a spiritual decision rather than I think this. And me personally, in that small group who stood aside, but finally came to the sense of, when my community, organic mistake, but that to me is not, see you later. It's, we stay in relationships, people who make, major mistakes. And that sense of, not so much but that I'm going to stay in contact with you, despite, my giant mistake. So that was something similar to forgiveness for me, but a little bit different. It's not, I'm right, and it's okay that you made this mistake, but we weren't able to work out our feelings, but we're going to remain in community. So those are the things that I thought of from that example that Steve gave.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, I've had to be reminded. They say over and over that spirit keeps teaching you the same lesson if you don't learn it the first time around. And I have had to learn the lesson that disagreement can be love. In my upbringing, agreement is love. If you disagree, it completely throws a wrench in the trust of we have love for each other. And it forces a facade of harmony that isn't genuine or real or really anything to rely upon. And so I've had to learn that disagreement is actually, weirdly enough, in my mind, I've had to understand stronger and more resilient because it's more enmeshed and healthily entangled than forced agreement. That disagreement and difference of opinion is an act of beloved community. So I really appreciate you sharing that, Sarah. Yeah, I think we often, here, this is an important slide, talking about a robust citational practice. I wanted to transition to the idea of resiliency, and I wanted to share with you the work of Emily Province, whom I've had the chance to learn more about. She is a traveling Quaker minister and an associate of Good News Associates. And in April of this year, she hosted an election violence prevention series. If you would like to learn more, you can visit this tinyurl.com/QuakerEVP website, where she discusses more about preventing violence, especially within this particular election year that we are actively witnessing unfolding. She will be giving a lecture at Pendle Hill on June 3rd, and then she will have another event at Friends Center on June 4th. So if you are in the Philly region, very close and accessible. But it was during her election violence series, so this is directly taken from her PowerPoint slides, so I want to be sure I'm giving credit where credit is due. But she talked about a resilient community being one that can absorb a shock without devolving into chaos or violence systemically collapsing. The most resilient communities are ones with a complex network of relational connections with good established connection. Whenever I hear something is relationship-based, I go, here we are. This is going to require a lot of time, isn't it? It's not something that can be enforced with coldness. Whenever something or a project or a community is actually grounded in relationships, things take time, but they also can lead to a scaffolding that, again, is more reliable. I wanted to ask each of you, I know we're approaching the hour, but if there's one particular moment anyone would like to share of when you've noticed, resiliency within your community, is continuing off of what Shara shared of conflict transformation, perhaps a moment when you went, whoa, this is really cool. We did this as friends. We really went through it, and we are stronger now that we are on the other end of it. Does anything pop up for friends here today?
Arch Street Friends is really good at funerals. I mean, we all come together really, really strongly, and that's really helpful for the families who've lost someone. Yeah.
Seeing Kristen on the screen reminds me of the years I worked on the local support committee for Quaker Voluntary Service. And there I see an organization that has had to pivot a couple of times in the last couple of years because of changes in demography, changes in student loan burdens. And they've figured out how to be resilient in a Quaker context, making decisions through unity that I just take my hat off to. And it's practiced also at the local level in the local support committee. At least I think it still is. Kristen, I don't know. But Kristen's the clerk of that. And it's a joy to be part of that experience, even though you never know from meeting to meeting what the next challenge is going to be. It doesn't devolve into violence or chaos or collapse, it devolves into new growth and positive change generally.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I wanted to ask, have there been moments, and I know we've discussed some of it here tonight, some friends have shared stories, but is there a response you have when you think of the question, how does my meeting practice forgiveness? Maybe I'm reminded, Susanna, you shared with us earlier tonight that, you know, someone can say, oh, I forgive you because I never have to see you again. And that's not genuine forgiveness. Maybe you or another friend can offer a definition of forgiveness that guides you in moments of conflict.
Well, forgiveness and love is supposed to be unconditional.
Mm.
Obviously, it's incredibly complicated, but we're talking about a meeting. We're not talking about a world war here. Have I forgiven anyone? I don't even remember. Maybe I have. I've forgotten. I mean, how does the meeting practice forgiveness? I'm not sure that that's even on the agenda. Maybe it is, and I just haven't noticed. That's the sort of question that I'd want to go away and think about and ask some people, and because that's actually a very complicated question.
What do you think makes it complicated?
Well, I just don't know. You know, I'm very analytical, and I just can't put together the numbers for this. Has there been anything that happened in the meeting that the meeting needed to forgive? Well, we spoke before about what happened to a friend who's actually on this call. That hasn't happened, and I'm not sure it will, but I hope it will.
I'm reminded, you know, talking about not having a supremely analytical mind. I studied theater, and I remember reading Greek tragedies, and one of the discussions during our class was, why do you think in Oedipus Rex there was banishment at the end of it, that there was an exile? And, you know, we all had conversations and discussions, and it makes for a great plot. And what we came around to was that banishment from a community, exile, complete exclusion, is the most painful punishment one could offer to a person, even greater than perhaps death, at least in the context of the Greek tragedies. That was the idea that was proposed, that as humans, we are so necessarily reliant on each other for our physical needs and our emotional needs and our spiritual needs, that to say to an individual, you can no longer be a part of this home,
right, is
one of the most severe punishments, one of the most cruel and brutal ways to enact violence on an individual. And I say that because that is the stakes of what we're witnessing. When conflict is not transformed in meetings, members leave. There is a self-exclusion that happens because for that particular member, the information that's being received is you are already banished. You are already not worthwhile or important to be here. When I have left communities, that is how I have felt. Kristen, I see you have raised your hand. Please share.
Well, I'm just sort of thinking about what you're saying now, but also your question here. And I feel like a few things I've noticed at my meeting, when there is severe conflict, it's often between what I've witnessed. It's often between two people or a small, maybe two or three people. And what I've noticed, and it sort of speaks to what you're saying about like people, staying versus leaving, and how do you practice forgiveness, is that it seems like the forgiveness really seems to work, and relationships are kind of reconciled when both sides are willing to stay in it. That I've seen it go both ways, where like people get really angry over something and they decide, that's it, I'm done, I'm out of here. And then the other side, people who say, this relationship is worth it to me to like keep going back in until we figure this out. And obviously there's a lot of factors in both cases on what might make someone keep in it and versus leaving. But it strikes me that we as friends have that kind of community where, because we don't have like a top-down hierarchy, or we shouldn't have a top-down hierarchy that's sort of telling us what to do, and we can like blame it on them. We can say, well, we don't like it, but that's what we have to do. We're kind of called to be in it with each other. And it's really hard work. And, I don't know what the answer is, because there are times when people just can't stay in it and they have legitimate reasons not to. But I feel like that's where the work has to happen. And like, kind of like you said, I guess it was, I don't know if it was the Bell Hooks quote, but or maybe it was whoever said, maybe it was Emily, whoever said that, we have to be able to handle these shocks without completely falling apart. That work has to be done in the peacetime, right? Like when there's but it's really hard work. And, we, especially when, to speak to what Lois's story, when there's people who have different agendas that maybe don't seem to match what our community wants, but they're very powerful agendas. It's like so complicated. But I think that's what we're called to do, I guess, and I don't have an answer. It's just a noticing.
Thank you for sharing your noticing, Kristen. Stephen, Mio?
Inaara, I think my answer to this question is that we practice this all the time in small ways. Not that we're practicing for the big conflicts, but flavors the big conflicts when they come along. That if we really care as a community, we forgive our foibles. As it says in the Lord's Prayer, none of us is perfect. None of us is probably even doing what we intend to do. But when we sit in meeting together, we're on committees together, we're at social hour together, we forgive each other a lot, because a lot of people screw up all the time. People don't return phone calls. People are late at meetings. People, are late in meeting for worship. People leave early. People disrupt. Babies cry. Generally, we forgive all of that because it's worth it to us to keep the community intact. I was in a situation in another meeting where it was an intense summer. It was the summer that all those churches were being burned in Alabama back in the 90s. And this one woman led the whole meeting to go on a crusade to rebuild burned up churches. And she did it under the aegis of another Quaker group who was actually pretty dysfunctional. And this ticked her off enough that by the end of the summer, she was ready to leave Quakers and leave the meeting. And the rest of us said, wait a minute, you're too valuable to us. We love you too much. And we ended up spending the whole fall in what was then called the Overseers Committee, having what we dropped everything. It was a listening project to listen to all the parties involved, get the full story. And in the course of her being heard deeply about what really bothered her about this whole experience, she stayed, and the meeting was healed. So sometimes you need to go on a proactive healing process that's maybe even bigger than forgiveness. Forgiveness is the aim, but there are lots of steps in between to get there. But on a daily basis, I think we do a lot of forgiving all the time. The dishwasher doesn't work, or the heat isn't on, or whatever, and we work around it, and it's okay. So the answer to me is every day. on a low and the low octane basis to prepare for the big crises later.
And something I'm just going to tag on here, I've learned is that there are all kinds of connections between meeting members, right? That are this network that's invisible. Like I'm the new clerk and I don't know who, goes to movies or does whatever with each other. But I know I don't have to come up with all the answers, thank goodness. And people are often watching out for each other in unseen ways and being kind.
Said Ben Pink Dandelion in his 2014 Swarthmore lecture said, Quakerism is a DIT religion. It's a do-it-together religion. Because we don't have clergy, we have to do every single thing together. And it's really, we get to see that unfolding sometimes in places like business meeting, where we're talking about the HVAC system, the same breath we're talking about grief and loss for a particular member. We think about every single aspect of the community life. And I'm also noticing that part of the resolution is not the resolution, it's the tone, it's almost as if the conflict itself, yes, is important, and also making sure that there's constant reassurance to all members involved that they are important is really what's critical too. That perhaps is a belief that there's been some doubt created during this conflict, and members have risen when conflict has occurred to say, listen, you are important, and you are important, and you are important, and your concern is important. Tell me more, and tell me more, and I'll say it back to you to make sure I understand. That there's this constant rechecking of the foundation and returning to making sure things are okay. And it's an action of great persistence. That can be, if it was left to just one person, tiring, but as Mio said, if it's in this larger ecosystem of relationships, almost invisible, but strong and healthy. And, I always say healthy entanglements. And I know there's sometimes a worry about codependency, but community to me is how do we create entanglements? How do we make it harder for you and me to be separate? And so I want to be very intentionally enmeshed with you. I want there to be knots formed if I try and disengage with you as a fellow community member. And so I'm noticing that has been brought up too. And from Kristen, I share a lot what you mentioned around both parties wanting to hang in there. I think another part of what's so interesting, I've had friends be like, what does it mean if someone transfers their membership? Aren't you a Quaker? And I'm like, yes, but you're part of a meeting. And if you want to transfer membership, even if the meeting is half a mile down the road, you have to go through a process, that there is an attachment, a commitment, for some, a covenant between the individual and their local monthly meeting. And the question of what is community? Am I part of this community? Does this community align with my definitions of togetherness? Is constantly being revisited as well, especially during conflict. But ideally, as Kristen said, and as Steve and Mio shared, this happens in more fruitful ways during peace times as well, when we are in alignment with each other. I wanted to share a story of Mahala Dickerson and forgiveness. And I wanted to share it because this was an article written by Charlotte Basham in Friends Journal, and it mentions the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting Youth. So I was like, woot woot, mention. But in short, I'll offer a summary that Mahala Dickerson is a individual that was very influential and helpful for Alaskan Friends in getting the meeting started. Many friends in Alaska used her home for sessions and during various events. And at one point, Mahala, during her home, when friends were visiting, a couple of friends said very disparaging remarks toward her that were racist. And the friends who made these comments against her did not agree with that assessment. And that led to 7 years of distance and harm and pain between Mahala and the larger Alaskan Friends community. And in 2002, there was a joint meeting for the youth from the Philadelphia Yearly Meeting and the Alaskan Friends Conference. And during worship sharing, a friend was given the message of, "Must I restore what I have not stolen?" And that one particular friend who had yet to apologize, I know I'm recalling what Steve said about, letting spirit work in miraculous ways. The friend was moved by words of spirit and went and apologized to Mahala in an earnest way. And those 7 years of distance and pain came to an end. And that particular section of the article, Charlotte writes, reconciliation had begun. She didn't say had ended or had been achieved. It had begun. The work had just started from that point of reconciliation. So this is tremendous work we do. It is exhausting, and it is a work of spirit, and it is important that we do it together, relying upon each other, carrying it, learning how to carry it in different ways. And the reward, friends, what is the reward? Why do we do this work? Why focus on forgiveness? What motivates you?
Makes our hearts grow.
Mm.
All of it, individually and as a meeting, as a community.
Actually, I like the Teilhard de Chardin quote, "We are not physical beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a physical experience." When you look at it that way, forgiveness and love are the currency of spirit. And we can draw on these vast reserves of our souls to get through the hard times.
I have a very simple formula. Look for the light in every human being. That's my very simple formula. Every human has value. And that's what I get from the peace testimony, which we were talking about before. That's what I get that's the basis of my Quaker faith. It's the light of the divine is in every human. And yeah.
And in that way, when we forgive in our everyday life and within the context of our local meetings, we are practicing that peace testimony because we are preventing violence from occurring. The brutality of ignoring pain, ignoring harm, and the brutality of letting it fester and break and fracture us. In that way, peace is about war, yes, and peace is about transforming when something is not fully yet known, but has to be worked upon together. I thought that love was something that I could experience from individual relationships, and I have. And I have to say that it has been only after I began attending my local meeting that I got to experience and offer, both give and receive, love to a group of people. I thought I had been in community when I was younger, but I hadn't been. And I feel the blessing of being among friends. And I do hope that as we leave this gathering we have joined tonight, we can both practice asking for forgiveness, because like Steve said, we're going to screw up, friends. We are. And people will screw up too. So let us practice asking for forgiveness. Let us practice in our day-to-day lives, modeling how we ask for forgiveness. And let us model and practice forgiving each other as well. And may this blessing continue to unfold for us in our meetings. I want to thank each of you for spending your time with me. I've had a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed each of you spending your time and evening with me, especially on a Sunday, especially on a holiday weekend. So much love and gratitude to all of you, and to Lois and Susanna and Alec for helping organize it. May we end with some closing waiting worship? Would that be okay, friends?